Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Welcome to a very distinguished audience for our very distinguished panel. I'm Corleen Kraft, President-elect of City Club, and I am very pleased to welcome you to the fourth in our series of Keeping Oregon's Promise. Today's theme is building community, and I think many of you longtime Portlanders will agree that Portland is a village, but building community within that village is what our program today is about. Next Friday, November 12th, or that would be December 12th, we're joining with the League of Women Voters on a program to present judicial independence. And our speakers will be Honorable Wallace P. Carson, Jr., who's the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, and Frances Baker, who is the President of the Portland League of Women Voters. Now, for any of you who have shared a cab with me taking a ride from the MAC to another venue, hear this and hear it well. It's at the Benson. And the following program will be at the Benson as well. Incidentally, if you want to reserve online for this program, go to our website and you'll note that we have proudly launched a new look. It's complete with photos of members and meetings and has some great new features, but one of the most important of which is that you can now pay online. There's a secure site that we have partnered with something called PayPal. Any of you who've ordered online may know what it is, and it's a secure site. So you can pay online and avoid waiting in line when you get here. Also, as you may recall, I am chair of the Annual Fund Committee, and I would be very remiss if I didn't mention to you that you can go online and contribute. So we're making it so easy. I'd like to say that at the end of the year, this is when many of us give, and just a special note that this year, City Club is part of the Cultural Trust, so for every dollar you contribute to the City Club, you can contribute an equal amount to the Cultural Trust for a tax credit, almost free. Please do check out the site to see the new features. It's very interesting. Gwen Milius, who is a member of the Board of Governors and co-founder of the New Leaders Council, and her company, Stevie and Milius, along with Studio Ridge, LLC, created the site, and they did most of the work pro bono. The site is also supported by a contribution from Shields, Oblitz, and Johnson. If you're not a City Club member, you can now join online, and today is the right day to do it, because when we have these Keeping Oregon's Promise series, we waive the $25 introductory membership fee. So you can go online, you can become a member, you can be billed monthly if you like. We're making it so easy, I cannot imagine why everyone doesn't join. And contribute while you're there, just 2 clicks. Today is the last day to sign up for this Arts and Cultures holiday program. It's going to be held at Il Fornaio here in Northwest Portland from 4 to 6 on December 10th. And $15 will get you into the event and provide you with Sicilian wine and antipasto while you socialize. The featured speaker will be Stuart Herodner, who is Visual Arts Curator for PICA, Portland Institute for Contemporary Arts, and he will talk about the flurry of recent arts events and discuss what these shows accomplished, what they mean for the future of the creative community in Portland. Holiday attire is appropriate, and you can see Cullen Brady, one of the staff, in the back to give him your check if you want to attend. Sounds like a fun event. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Pacific Core, CH2M Hill, and Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, and we are, believe me, very grateful for their support. I'd like now to introduce our speakers, our extremely distinguished panel, as I mentioned. Tony Hobson Sr. is the president and CEO of Self-Enhancement Incorporated, SEI. He's a Portland native, graduating from Jefferson, and he later received his BA degrees in psychology and sociology, as well as a teaching certificate from Willamette University. In 1991, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Willamette for public service. He taught, counseled, and coached in the Portland Public Schools for several years before founding SEI in 1981 as a 1-week summer camp committed to improving collegiate and employment opportunities for high school students. The initial camp served 80 students, and the rest, they say, is history. Since then, SEI has expanded to serve more than 1,200 students a year in various programs, has been widely recognized, including being named a Point of Light by President George Bush. Hobson has also been recognized and received many awards for his activism and community leadership. Doug Stam's also a native Oregonian, with a background in private business, the nonprofit world, and law, and he's been executive director of Meyer Memorial Trust since April of 2002. Mr. Stamm has fiscal, leadership, and administrative responsibilities for the trust, which has awarded over 4,200 grants in excess of $328 million. I know we're used to hearing the B word now, billion, but this is pretty good for Oregon. $328 million to organizations in Oregon and Southwest Washington. Prior to joining the Meyer Trust, as National Director of Portland-based Friends of the Children, Stamm initiated the expansion of its model program to 10 cities across the United States. And before entering the nonprofit world in a professional capacity, Mr. Stamm held several executive positions at Nike, beginning in 1989, including Global Director of Public Affairs, Assistant Director of Sports Marketing, and Assistant Corporate Counsel. He is a graduate of both Stanford University and Northwestern School of Law and has served on a number of national and local boards of organizations primarily involved with community building and youth. And finally, Reverend Michael McCloskey was born in Omaha and educated in the United States in the Far East and graduated from high school in Naha, Japan. He earned a BA in history from Kalamazoo College and a law degree at Northwestern School of Law. He and Mr. Stamm just discovered they were at least college mates, or I don't know if they were classmates. That I will leave classmates. They were indeed classmates at the Northwestern School of Law, and he later joined the law firm of Miller Nash et al. In Portland. He's still an active member of the Oregon Bar Association. Although he was successful in the practice of law, he had a life-altering experience and changed his course, and so he then studied for the priesthood and subsequently received a doctorate in sacred theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. Now, 2 decades later, he's a respected and beloved leader of a congregation in Portland. He spent several years as a television commentator speaking on ethical questions, and he is now on a 6-member panel of a council advisor for the area's archbishop. He currently serves as president of 2 separate companies that build and run nonprofit housing developments for at-risk populations. One is Village Enterprises, and the other is SAGE, which stands the acronym for Services for All Generations. The program today will be moderated by Ethan Seltzer, who is not a stranger to practically any of you here. He is the director of the School of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University. And our board host today is Heather Kometz, who is a tax attorney with Hannah Strader, PC. She also serves as co-chair of the City Club New Leaders Council. Now, this is a little departure because the program today has been structured as a moderated panel. All of the questions will be asked from questions that are written at the cards, from the cards on your table. So what I would ask is during the course of the comments, if you would please fill out any questions that you have, and this is a privilege reserved for City Club members only, although our guests from Lincoln High School, that's who I thought you were. Our guests from Lincoln High School are members, and they're allowed to ask some of their usually very piercing questions. Raise your card as if you finish them after all of the comments have been completed, and staff will come around, pick them up, and bring them up here to the front. Thank you very much, and I'd like now to introduce Tony Hobson.
Thank you, Corleen. It's a pleasure to be here and speak on this subject of building community. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what Corleen just shared there, but born and raised in Portland, grew up in North Portland in the Albina community, attended Beach Elementary School, which was predominantly white. As Corleen said, attended Jefferson High School, and when I attended it, it was predominantly black. Spent some time at Mount Hood Community College, spent 2 years back in Kentucky at Morehead State University, spent some time at Portland State, and yes, I did get my degrees from Willamette University. Presently, I am CEO of Self-Enhancement, Inc., youth program for at-risk youth. Our goal is to help young people realize their full potential. I just give you that little background to say that from the standpoint of community, I've had experiences in a variety of communities. Some that were predominantly white, some that were predominantly black, some that were wealthier than others. My experiences, though, have led me to ask the question when we started talking about this thing called community. And my question is, what is it? Is it black? Is it white? Is it red or yellow? Is it lower class? Is it middle class? Is it upper class? Is it educated? Is it on public assistance? Is it Christian? Is it Jewish? Is it Muslim? Is community straight or is it gay? Is it law-abiding or is it criminal? Is it you or is it me? While working in Portland Public Schools, I had the chance to work in several different high schools. Jefferson High School, Roosevelt High School, Lincoln High School, Grant, Benson. And I guarantee you, when you think about community, there was a very different perception of community as it related to the students in those schools and the parents of those students in those schools. What I saw in a Roosevelt Jefferson in terms of students and parents and what they saw as their right and authority to do within those schools and within those communities was very different than what I saw when I worked at Lincoln High School. Very different attitude from parents, very different attitude from kids in terms of community. I believe that true communities building requires that you embrace all of those who live, work, and play in your community. I didn't say tolerate. I said embrace all those who live, work, and play in your community. My definition of community is the presence of a collective group of human beings at any place and time. But we don't get to choose who those human beings are. Now, it may be either an effective or an ineffective community. We can opt out or opt in, but you will pay now or you will pay later. Community is about individuals building relationships by street, neighborhood, city, and beyond. We all exist as part of a larger community, whether we like it or not. I know this sounds somewhat idealistic, but let me give you a couple examples. When SEI, program in which I'm president and CEO of, started looking for a place to build our center, we were given by the city a spot in Unthank Park. Unthank Park at the time in North Portland was being run by the Kirby Street Crips. If you stepped into that park was there for you to either buy drugs or sell drugs. Now, so what do we do about that? We're trying to build a center. Now, you could say, call the police, run them out of there. No, the individuals there were a part of the community. We had to go in and talk to, negotiate with the Kirby Street Crips to get the park to build our center on. Now, we could have, as I say, got the police, run them out, but I would liken that to running in Iraq and running them out. After the fact, they can snipe you to death, and they would have sniped us to death had we run them out without trying to have a conversation, treat them like human beings, and build a community that included them. Now, we don't condemn what they do, but they've moved it outside the park. And not only did they move it outside, then they protected the construction of our facility. We have no graffiti on our building. They protect what we do there because they are a part of the community, even though they are doing some things that would be undesirable to most of us. Another example, building the Center for Self-Enhancement cost $10 million. The community in which it sits in could not come up with $10 million. It was only because of a community, a broader community coming together made up of businesses, made up of government, both city, state, as well as county. A whole cadre of folks from the school district and families and young people who all came together as a community to help self-enhancement, put up a facility that now serves over 2,000 youth and children a year and is the anchor for that particular community. Those are just two examples of pulling things together from a much broader perspective. So why do some communities do so well and others not? Personally, I think it's because, or those who do well do it because you respect, or they have a respect for humanity first. Children are accepted and cherished. The elderly are accepted and cherished. Ethnicity is embraced. Differences are accepted. Reaching out to others is commonplace. Sacrificing a little of self is commonplace. Building relationships that matter, and accepting our interdependence on each other. So for me, when I think about this whole concept of building community, simply put for me, community building for me is just about building people. Thank you.
Actually, Tony and I didn't script this, but I'm not going to talk actually about what community is, because I'd completely agree with Tony, and I think community needs to be inclusive. That goes without saying in my mind. What I'm going to speak a little bit more to is what are we doing around, what is community building, and what's happened to positive community building, not only in this city, but in this state, and then what are some of the ingredients that maybe we could pull together, that we could strive to and work towards in order to build back up our communities. First of all, I just want to say this series, I've had an opportunity to attend a number of them, and I think it's the kind of dialogue that not only needs to go on in Portland, but needs to go on throughout this state. And I want to give you a little bit of insight when I'm through, if we have time, on what's called Foundations for a Better Oregon, where 5 foundations have come together to try to help inspire that kind of dialogue, and you'll be the first to hear about it. It's the first time it's going public. So in terms of what is community building? Well, I have 2 definitions for it. There's one that I would call as a historically satisfying definition, and that is it's the civic engagement. And when we say civic engagement, I mean civic engagement across the board, as Tony's referred to, that improves the quality of life, so it upgrades something within our quality of life within a community. It can be the community that Tony's referred to that's been built around SEI, although I'd submit that we need to think of community building literally not only on a metro basis, but on a statewide basis and beyond our individual communities. There's a second definition, and Webster's and other dictionaries always allow you 3 or 4 definitions. So there's a second one that I like that specifically addresses where I see community building being used to resolve conflicts, and that is a shared experience toward a common purpose across lines that would otherwise divide. I'm going to say that once more. A shared experience toward a common purpose across lines that would otherwise divide. That is the true essence, in my mind, of community building. So what are some examples of community building? SEI is a prime example, but there are others, and many of them I'm going to refer to are those that the Meyer Trust has supported over the last 20 years. There's Solve. You've heard from Jack McGowan. You know the tens of thousands of individuals that they're bringing together in a positive way in communities across this state. There's SMART, that is getting people that otherwise would not be engaged in our schools. And it's not about just reading to the kids. That's a wonderful thing. But it's about educating people about our education system and the needs of that system. It's building a community that understands the educational needs of our state. Stand for Children, a wonderful grassroots organization that's mobilizing people all around this state, and a lot of their best work in some of the smaller communities to stand up for children's rights that other people aren't paying attention to. Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity is about building homes for low-income people that otherwise couldn't afford those homes. But the real essence of Habitat for Humanity is to bring together people within a community to improve their community and develop a sense of self-worth and camaraderie with others in their community that might be different, as Tony's explained. And if you read Robert Putnam and some of his books, he talks about one of the things that makes Oregon different is that we have more friends groups, and excluding Friends of the Children, but we have Friends of the Trees, Friends of the Parks, Friends of the Rivers. The list goes on, and that's a wonderful thing. It's, again, an example of building community. And then there's the groups who take on the controversy. Groups like Oregon Solutions, and outside of the metro area, the Deschutes River Conservancy. Groups that are adept at bringing together government, business, and community and concerned citizens to resolve controversial issues. And I'd submit that in building communities, we need to see more and more of these groups to be effective to build strong communities across the state. In a more indirect way, much of what the Meyer Trust has done to help build communities is to build places, to build buildings and spaces for people to gather and to share their common interests. Libraries, community centers, senior centers, and other facilities that indirectly allow a community to come together. So what is the state of community building in Oregon? Well, I referred to Robert Putnam, and if you haven't read his books, either Better Together or Bowling Alone, you need to do so, because specifically with regard to Better Together, he singles out Portland as being a model over the past 30 years for positive civic engagement. I have to tell you, I was frankly a little surprised. Apparently some of you are also. Mr. Putnam attributes much of his findings to the belief that the metro area local governments and decision makers have encouraged and been accepting of the value of community input and the airing of differences as a means to find common ground and common resolution, that our government, our local governments, have been open to community advocates coming in and expressing their different points of view and then finding common ground. I'm not sure, and consistent with Tony's remarks, that I agree with Mr. Putnam that this process has been an open process. I suspect that it instead has engaged what I would call the usual suspects in the process, and that's not to be critical of those individuals, but it's certainly not been an open process to all communities. Regardless of whether you agree with Mr. Putnam or not, of more concern is the fact that he goes on to say that this positive aspect of Portland life is in jeopardy. And with that, I would completely agree. He doesn't go as far as I would go to say that it's actually further than just in jeopardy, that in fact it's already changed, not only in Portland, but across this state, and we're now a place that does not foster community engagement and community building. So why? I'm going to give you a couple of the key factors, and I know we're going to discuss some of these, so I'm briefly going to highlight them. We have a we versus them mentality. Rather than focus on what we can do together, we focus on how we can tear down or tear apart individuals. It's now hip to be divisive. And rather than to seek common ground between our differences in a means to build thoughtful consensus. There's tremendous apathy, and if you talk with Adam Davis of Davis Hibbets, it's frightening to know that 18 to 34-year-olds, he's described them as having absolutely disappeared from the radar screen of civic engagement. Heather and some of her friends exempt. But it is absolutely frightening, and even more frightening is that the next age group up that Tony and Mike and I have moved out of here in the last 5 years, the 35 to 44-year-old groups are less engaged than they were previously. So from age 44 on down, we clearly have a problem with positive civic engagement. We have the cynics, we have the critics, we have the negative media, we have the press of our lives. Now, those of us that have wonderful jobs, wonderful families, we're blessed. We still have the press of life, though, of trying to balance all those aspects and finding time for ourselves. And too often, we don't get engaged in positive community involvement, let alone the mother who is just above the, a low-income mother with 2 children and trying to scrape out a living. Obviously, she is not or has little chance to be involved in community building. The cultural and the language barriers are significant, and the last point I think that's important we need to think about is how we overcome the disconnect that technology has created for us. Technology has we can communicate with each other, depending on how you define communication, more rapidly and more effectively and more regularly. In fact, there's almost nowhere we can go in the world anymore without communicating with one another. But that type of technology, that type of communication is not a positive way to resolve discourse in our communities. We still need face-to-face dialogues, and technology cannot, at least at this point, help us with that. To me, the most concerning fact is not only have these torn down our communities, but it's really gone to the basic trust of one another. I think that citizens, not only throughout the city, throughout the state, but in their own neighborhoods, have lost a sense of trust and belief in one another. So how do we get it back? We start with leadership, and we start not with heroes like Tom McCall. That's with all due respect to Tom McCall. But really, we need the widespread, the grassroots leaders, a lot of which are here. I mean, to some extent, I'm talking to the converted here already. We need the selflessness, an approach to selflessness over self-interest, the ability to negotiate and find common or middle ground for the good of the whole. And we need to put integrity into the process. Let's express our biases, our special interests before we engage in these conversations. Let's get them out on the table. Let's embrace the risk of change, and let's accept the fringe for who they are, and stop wasting our time trying to convince those who are either so far right or so far left that we're never going to get them into the middle. And let's also start to respect public service, and I mean public service in the broadest sense of the word. There may be a call to action that would do this. It may require a significant crisis before we really start to build our communities back up. But in the meantime, I'd start with a small step. I'd challenge each of you to reconnect with citizens and with your neighbors with a basic approach of trust and respect. Thank you.
Community deprived me of the preparation I wanted to make for you today, because community is oftentimes messy and unpredictable. I live and work in such a community, and as I was getting ready to come here, we had one of the kind of regular crises. The Christmas tree arrived, and in its zeal, the residents, all of whom are elderly and live in the building that I'm in, is we call it an active retirement community. They decided that they would load the tree into the elevator, triggering a major electrical crisis in the elevator, which immediately shut down the elevator, leaving only the tree in the elevator, and depriving many of the individuals who had gathered that morning, as they gather every morning for coffee and rolls and conversation and camaraderie, the opportunity to return to their rooms for medication, for the necessities of nature, and creating immediately in the lives of a dozen or more individuals a major disruption. And I, of course, am in my office hearing all this, wondering at what point I have crossed the moral line from neglect to downright abandonment. And finally, I sort of venture out into the hallway, encounter the crises, and then immediately begin to prepare the list of things that I think need to be done to solve it. And then I'm very politely told that I'm not necessary, that all I need to do is get the elevator repairmen out here, and they will take care of the rest. And they had already done that. They had found a way to get the individual whose medication was up on the 4th floor, his medication. They had loaned their own bathrooms to those individuals who were in need of them and were deprived of access to their own. They had calmed the individual who was recovering from a stroke and was concerned that maybe if he should have a stroke again, the ambulance wouldn't be able to get in. They had literally reacted as members of a community do, by recognizing the common bond and the common gifts, and sharing the particular and individual talents and strengths that they have to address collectively, through the richness and diversity of individual life and experience, a common concern. So I didn't need to do a great deal of research about community. I simply had to go out into my hallway. Now, I do have an understanding of community that is larger than crises, however. I do have an experience of community that is larger than those who improvise a solution. I have an understanding of community that arises, from my perspective, from a fundamental understanding of the nature of the human person, because it is my learned and personal belief that the individual, each of us in this room, each of the people in that hallway, every one of the residents of the villages that I am privileged to be part of, each of us is relational by nature. That the most fundamental truth about any one of us is that we are part of a relational reality. Whether one sees, as I do, that relational nature as being reflective of the God who created us, or whether one simply acknowledges it as a fundamental truth of sociology and psychology, the reality is each of us is dependent from the moment of our inception to the moment of our death, and perhaps beyond, on the other. And nothing is more profound in our life than the other. Nothing gives us greater joy than the knowledge that we are loved or cared for or matter to the other. And nothing brings into our life greater sorrow or tension than the conflicts or disappointments or betrayals that we have with the other. But the reality of our relational nature puts us immediately into an existential, and I would offer an eternal tension. The tension between I and you. The tension between the fact that while I need you, I am different from you. And there is nothing that the lover struggles with greater than the reality than the one that they so desire and need is still other than them. And how frustrating it can be to have loved deeply and for a long time and realize I still don't understand. You still don't get it. That is our reality as human beings. We are relational, but the relationship pits us in a tension between self and community. And let us be quite clear that community is more than life in common. More than life in common. Living together does not create community, nor is community a commodity that can be manufactured. Daniel Borstein, in his analysis of contemporary America, and particularly the development of suburban America, points out that those who developed suburbs rarely intended to live in them. They were products to be marketed. And community is not a commodity. And it is not the accident of being drawn together. Community in its deepest sense are a series of relationships that acknowledges both the interdependence and the independence of its members, that it recognizes and cherishes the differences and diversities of experiences and gifts, and understands that we all hang together or we all hang separately. T.S. Eliot said, "What is there to life if not life in common?" Now, I am privileged in my history, which I've now been outed as being older than 44, so this is quite a, I was hoping to get away with that. It has been my experience in my life in government and law, my life in ministry, and my life in the last 7 years as the president of a nonprofit dedicated to allowing individuals to experience community in how they lived and the care they received and in the social opportunities that they experienced. It has been my concerted and continued and, I have to say, privileged experience to see the fact that what men and women want above all is to have their dignity recognized and appreciated, and an opportunity to share the appreciation that they have for others. I am president of Village Enterprises. It is a 501c3 nonprofit. I'll tell you later how to make out checks if you like. That is dedicated to providing housing and care for a variety of peoples, most particularly, but not exclusively, the low-income elderly. We have 4 villages, and villages is not a marketing ploy. Villages is a very deliberate attempt on our part to capture in a word the fundamental belief that empowers us, a belief that men and women are meant to live together. And that even though that living together is at times chaotic and confusing and messy and even tension producing. Nonetheless, it is the stuff of life. And we recognize that there is no group that is more disenfranchised than those who age, and those who age in poverty, and those who age alone. And so our villages are not made up of just merely the elderly. In our first village, St. Anthony Village, we have more than 200 apartments, but we also have serving individuals ranging from the active retired to those who suffer from Alzheimer's and dementia. And I will point out that Alzheimer's is not an illness merely of the elderly. And one of our first Alzheimer's residents was a gentleman who at age 49 still had 2 daughters in high school. But we also have a child development and daycare center offering care to 70-some children, predominantly from single-parent, low-income families. We have a staff of 65 individuals of various ethnic, language, personal backgrounds. We have a parish community of more than 400 families, many of whom come some distance to be part of this community. This village is a microcosm of what we believe all places are to be like. A respectful, dynamic, challenging, sometimes frustrating, always vibrant collection of people whose greatest awareness is that they are not alone and that they have something to offer. It is my privilege to go back to such a place. It's my privilege to work there day in and day out. I can only hope that it's also my privilege at some point to die in such a place. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you'll agree we've had 3 excellent presentations. My name is Ethan Seltzer. I'm the moderator for the presentations today. And as Ray Polani is doing right at this moment, I just want to remind you that if you have a question to ask, write it on a piece of paper, hold it up, and a City Club staff member will bring it up to us, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. You know, in thinking about the presentations, just briefly, you know, Tony started out by talking about community as something that had a lot to do with proximity. You know, there you are, you got to make something of it, but you got to make something of the whole thing. You can't selectively decide that it's just this part and not that part. And then Doug talked a lot about common cause, the good of the whole, right? That, you know, in thinking about the state of Oregon, you know, it's time to basically begin to think about what it is that really orients us to, you know, kind of the core values, the core purposes here, and that we can use as a way of explaining our community, not just to ourselves, but to other people. And that's particularly important, I might add, because this is a state that grows by people coming from other places, heavily influenced by in-migration. And then Father Maslowski, I think, did a great job of just kind of reminding us that, you know, we are, in fact, relational beings, that community, in fact, comes out of not just the advantages that we have of working together, but just the real basic need that we have to be in touch with each other and to learn from each other, to get things from each other. Well, I guess the first question I'd like to put out to the panel is this. It's all about relationships. You know, it's all about getting people to connect with each other. And Robert Putnam, who was mentioned, and by the way, who will be here in Portland in February to sign a book at Powell's, to speak at Portland State, and I believe to speak at City Club. February 27th or 6th or 7th, anyhow, one of those days in February, has distinguished between, you know, relationships that get built among communities that we don't particularly admire. Skinheads, for example, have terrific relationships among each other and very strong community. And the relationships that I think were alluded to here, relationships that cross lines, that cross boundaries, which is, I think, in some ways what we're seeking. What can we do to cross those boundaries? What can we do to ensure that those relationships get built, you know, in positive ways across the things that divide us, so they're not just descriptions of what we're comfortable with? Tony, you want to take a shot?
I'll start. Again, I think it would, for me, it goes back again to the human side. I mean, if you get caught up in what a person does or what they represent as opposed to the human that is there inside, then it will keep you from moving forward. So for me, how you cross those lines is to see the human being first and recognize that they're on the planet just like you are, and whether you agree with where they're coming from, they have every right that you have to express what they express, to be that which they want to be. So for me, it's just about the humanness, first and foremost, getting beyond that, and then dealing with the other stuff. And we don't have to agree with everybody. We don't have to agree with everybody's point of view, where they're coming from, their religion, etc. But man, if you can't recognize them as a human being, I mean, when I walked into that park and I'm looking at gang members, look, I'm looking at them saying like, you just need to get up out of here. But the reality is that these are somebody's sons. I mean, they got sisters and brothers. And I had to realize that these were human beings that needed to be respected as such. And what I found is that when I gave them respect, they gave me respect.
Doug, what can we do? What are the kinds of things that you've seen working around the state, the things that your organization's involved with that bridges groups, that crosses boundaries? This is not just about making people feel more comfortable with themselves, right?
Yeah, I'd actually like to first just add on to Tony's point. I think what Tony has done in building a community, he entered a community, if you'll call it that, at that time that was a negative community, and he has bridged a gap between that negative community by building a positive community. And I suppose to some extent that goes to my earlier point of, while you want all groups to be part of community, if there are certain that won't bridge that gap once you build that positive community, then you have to, in effect, drown them out with the positive community.
Well, so we got to take risks. Community building is not.
Absolutely.
It's not like eating vanilla ice cream, yogurt, and white bread. It's about trying something on the menu you've never tried before.
Absolutely. And just two groups that I'd mentioned, and I referred to them. I'm not sure if the audience is very familiar with them, but the Oregon Solutions, for example, while that initiated under Governor Kitzhaber, it's an example of groups that are positively, or going out to communities, actually responding to community requests where they have a particular issue, a particular problem, or a particular problem that they can turn into an opportunity, but they can't figure out how to bring all the components of community together that we talked about, government, business, and the average citizen, and your activists. And there are groups like that. There are a number of them across this state that are gaining more and more popularity and credibility in being effective negotiators and mediators, if you will, in building community.
Bringing people together. Okay, sounds good. I'd like to turn to Heather now. Heather is a board host. We're happy to have you ask a question to the panel. It's be a good time.
My question is this. People often come across, you talked about crises, Father Reich, and the gang members in the park, and crises often brings us to a point where we have to overcome something to build community. But outside of the immediacy of that crisis, what structurally do you think Oregon has that impedes it from building community? What structurally do you think is in our way of making Portland and all of its communities around and throughout the state stronger?
It's always a little risky to criticize yourself and your neighbors, but let me offer this not as an observation, not so much about structural as attitudinal. I think that one of the realities that we deal with in Oregon is that for a variety of reasons, historical and cultural, sociological, we have a very strong predisposition to individualism. We have a very strong history of that. Now that in and of itself is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's an almost essential thing if you're going to both honor the uniqueness of the human person and you're at the same time going to be honest about the dynamic that moves society forward. But the problem with individualism is that it can breed within us a sense of isolation, a sense of not just self, but of self alone. And consequently, it leaves us very vulnerable. It leaves us individually vulnerable in moments of crises, whether they be illness or aging or economic adversity or relational collapse or whatever. But it also leaves us very vulnerable as a social group because we don't have a natural bond. We have bonds that we create oftentimes structurally through organizations, friends of this and friends of that, in point of fact, if we had a natural, and now I move my observation beyond Oregon to perhaps the world, but if we had a natural sense of community, we wouldn't need SEI. We wouldn't need village enterprises. We, in a sense, wouldn't need the Meyer Trust, although I will never say that on paper, I assure you.
You don't need to, it's on television.
Yeah, actually,
And the
I need
trustees are
Meyer Trust.
watching.
But the reality is, we do need those, we need to create those vehicles and instruments of collectivity, because that isn't, for a variety of things, natural to us. And I think that we have to understand that predisposition to individualism, both in its positive sense of what it enables us to do in terms of respecting the individual and valuing them, but at the same time we have to be honest and say, you know, that gets in the way sometimes of building community. That gets in the way of understanding. That gets in the way of compromise. That gets in the way of dialogue. You know, a community, if it has anything, has a group of people who listen to each other, and not just with their ears, but with their hearts, with an understanding that listening to each other helps you understand yourself as well.
And I would add to that as you're listening, you get to a point of trusting. And I believe that when we look at what's structurally wrong, it's about trust, and it's about being educated about what other people are feeling. I mean, it took me a long time to understand this whole concept of the Portland metro area versus the valley versus, you know, the southern to the eastern. I mean, I had no understanding about what those people were feeling until I got a chance to visit them face to face and learn about their concerns and know that their pain was just like the pain I was feeling in inner Northeast Portland. And the kids there had issues. Maybe the issues were a little bit different, but their pain was not different. Well, I gained a whole new respect for folks across the state now, and now I understand. But I just wonder how many people don't understand because they've not had an opportunity to share or see some of those things for themselves to fully understand. Now I can trust when I hear something coming from another part of the state. I need to just trust that those people know what they're talking about, and I can feel their pain now. And to me, we need to do more of that.
I think just to add on to what Tony's saying, there has been an attitudinal shift. I don't know that I'd call it a structural shift as much as an attitudinal, where I have a firm belief as a native Oregonian and living here most of my life that through the 70s and 80s, many people were attracted here, or many people that lived here thought about the quality of life in totality. I think there's a much more of a focus today about my quality of life, and that was profiled along by the Oregonian article about the 9 different states of Oregon. But I think there's been an attitudinal shift.
Well, you know, I think quite clearly that one of the things that we seem to be bucking is, on one hand, I think all of you are talking about the fact that, you know, community is very satisfying, and that when you talk to people, they're seeking community. You know, people say they want community, but we live in a world that basically says, hey, if you want to read a magazine just about what you care about, here it is, and you can forget those other magazines. Or, you know, if you want to kind of be in your car, you know, and kind of leave your garage, close the door with a clicker, drive to your parking structure, get out of that, you know, encounter no one on the street, you can live that kind of life as well. In other words, we've constructed a way of kind of living and consuming things that send us the message that we can have it our way, you know, always. So where does this engagement come from? What is it that we do to essentially maybe value the time and the struggle that it takes to build community, maybe more directly than we have to this point? How do we enter that into the equation? What would you say to business leaders, to elected leaders? What kind of changes should happen in our patterns of daily life to make this more part of what we expect to have happen? What do we do here? Mm-hmm.
Well, with respect to the business leaders, and I've thought a lot about this, and having been the Director of Public Affairs for Nike, I think our businesses, and unfortunately we have fewer and fewer significant businesses. Fortunately, we have very successful smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses, they have to first develop this trust that Tony's referred to with their employees. It's a very changing dynamic in the workforce these days, and we were just talking about this before lunch, and that is, when our parents were growing up, you know, there was a bond, or a belief, at least strong belief, that there was a bond of loyalty between a corporation or an employer and its employee. that's continued on generally through our generation, but the new generation, that bond doesn't exist, and it's been broken on both sides. Let's not kid ourselves. Companies look to downsize, they look to outsource, and there's very little reliability from an employee's perspective. So I think that bond and that trust has to be built, that respect between an employee and its employer, and then an employer needs to be serious about encouraging their employees and providing the incentive to the employees to get out and get engaged in community. It can be as simple as what a lot of companies do these days, where they help compensate they give their employees either time off or help compensate them, or both, for their volunteer time in the community. In terms of the bigger issue beyond the businesses, I think that, and this is what I was referring to earlier, where 5 foundations in the state are coming together to form a foundation that will not necessarily disperse funds, but we think that this state needs to have a neutral forum for civic engagement around some of these very tough issues. We don't know exactly how the process is going to work. It's the Ford Family Foundation, OCF, Meyer, Collins, and the Jeld Wynn Foundation out of Klamath Falls. So we have a very diverse group, both in their political beliefs, both in their location throughout the state, and we think that we're optimistic that this will provide a neutral forum for citizens to come together. And the first issue we're hoping to reach consensus on, it's more than 51%, is around K through 12 education, what citizens really believe the quality should be, the funding should be, and the accountability measures. And we're hoping that that type of open, unbiased dialogue will maybe help build stronger communities around the state.
Tony?
Ethan, let me add this. I hate to be cynical, but money is the root to all evil, as far as I'm concerned. As long as businesses...
All evil or all solutions or all?
Well, what I think is that as long as we put money first, it will be difficult to get to any of these other kinds of things that we're talking about. I mean, the human capital is what it's really about. And if business wants to put money first, then they're going to make decisions on how to make the next dollar, as opposed to how do I please my employee. And we're losing a lot of human beings because we're chasing money. And the best and brightest, half of them aren't even in school. They're not graduating. I mean, we got half of them locked up because we put money first. And I just think that if we're talking about trusting, if we're really talking about making a difference long term, I mean, it sounds like an oversimplified thing, but we got to think human capital before we think money. Now, personally, I think when you do that, the money does come bigger and better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I guess speaking of that, we've got lots of evidence to suggest that, incarceration costs a whole lot more than prevention.
Yeah.
We've had some very interesting experiences in this city to kind of demonstrate that community policing actually produces public safety more efficiently and more cost effectively than expecting someone else to provide it for us. But yet, we still kind of resist, basically, kind of the power of those observations and proceed in a manner which suggests that it's not about community, it's not about human capital. So where is the promise of Oregon here with respect to building community? Father Maslowski, you've thought a lot about this. What is it that we need to do to kind of elevate this notion of a relational kind of existence here in Oregon to something that really becomes something that we're known for, that we stand for?
Robert Kennedy once observed that society gets the criminals it deserves. I think by that he meant that that it's a reflection of our failures and our values. I think one of the things we need to rediscover and reappreciate the common good. We need to expand the understanding of the common good to be something that is larger than my agenda. We need to appreciate that you cannot arrive at community in a value-neutral environment. As you pointed out, I don't know which of the panel members pointed it out, but skinheads have great community. But that is not the model of community that we want to offer to our youth or to ourselves. Mm-hmm. Community must always have about it some pursuit of the good. And that's the basic Aristotelian philosophy, is that community, the polis, arises out of those individuals seeking good. And the greater good comes when you have the greater number of people seeking the greater and greater good. So I think we have to have, first of all, a rediscovery of the common good. That basically you cannot pit business against labor. You cannot pit one group against another and expect for there to be any kind of success. And one of the easiest ways for us, I think, to begin to take a step is to simply demand of our leaders, particularly candidates for office, that they stop engaging in the kind of deceptive and a negative approach to public service. It is not possible that every candidate is always right and his or her opponent is always wrong. There is, as a matter of fact, a number of wonderful ideas that could come together when people who are skilled and experienced in public service see each other not as opponents and adversaries, but as a matter of fact, as dispensers of some collective wisdom. That in and of itself would be very helpful. Let's stop all of the negativity and let's stop rewarding it or pursuing it. And I'm going on. One final thing is, then let us understand that good people can and will disagree. That to have a different perspective, be it political or religious or cultural, does not make you an adversary. It simply makes you different. And different isn't bad.
Right. You know, as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful author, Daniel Kemmis, who's written about this and suggested that, you know, there's this whole notion of practices of community. That community, like everything we want to do well, you know, whether it's play a musical instrument, make a big profit, whatever it is we want to do well, takes time, attention, practice. It's what people do. And frankly, that's where these relationships come from. So if you could each kind of, you know, ask us to practice community well here in the next 6 months, what would you like each Oregonian to do? You mentioned a little bit, I believe, Doug, about, you know, kind of think about your neighbors maybe in a different kind of way, but got about 1 minute each to kind of give us that you know, kind of New Year's resolution for the practice of community here in Oregon.
I would challenge everyone to get out of your comfort zone and try to step off your porch or out of your particular neighborhood and find something that you're a little uncomfortable with and reach out to somebody else. I think, as I said, community is about building people. And there's a lot of people who are in need, and there's a lot of us who can help, but have chosen not to do so. So I would just challenge people to get out of your comfort zone and reach to a kid or even to another adult and have something nice to say or support them in some kind of way that would help you build an individual relationship with that person.
I'd go back to and adding on to Father Mike's comment. I think the one thing he left out was overcoming the fear of change and positive change and even change that we're not sure what the outcome will be, but we know we can't continue with the way it is. And in approaching that, respect and trust, as Tony has talked about, and then you just got to take the time and the effort.
I'd suggest that each of us do a personal inventory of the relationships of our lives, beginning with those that are most intimate to us and those that are perhaps only tangential. And we'll take a look and see, what do we really contribute to them? What do we ask of them? What do we receive from them? When we've done that, let's make a commitment to just start with the easiest way of improvement. Progress in the world does not move forward by the mere action of heroes who do momentous things. It's the ordinary and mundane and daily events, the small kindnesses, the little considerations that slowly but inevitably transform lives and our world. And so I'd say, let's take a look at who we are, who we belong to, and let's recommit ourselves to doing a better job of loving the people we have.
And with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for a terrific presentation.
I'm reminded of something, the questions and answers here remind me of something I learned many years ago, and that is, you don't agree with me? Good, I can learn something. We'll see you next week at the Benson. We are adjourned. Thank you.